Hi, Laura. I'm so excited that you said yes and you are here chatting with me today. For you all who are watching, I met Laura 14 years ago. I was running my first nonprofit, Girls Like Us, and Laura was playing the piano with her beautiful voice, and she volunteered to sing at my first and second fundraiser. She's a musician. She has a beautiful voice. She's a mother of three gorgeous children. And here we are 14 years later, raising awareness again. So I'm really thankful for your allyship, first of all, to humankind. It's admirable. And I would love for you to tell the audience about you.
Okay, well, thank you for having me. So I was born and raised in South Jersey, grew up with my parents. My mom is deaf and my dad was hard of hearing. Sadly, no brothers and sisters. I always wanted, to have a brother and sister, but I was an only child. In 2002, I got married and I have my three beautiful children. And we struggled with infertility for about 5 years. So they're my blessings, my miracle babies. And I'm just so happy and privileged that I can be a mom. Right now, I have a few different jobs because I can't decide what I want to do. So I do them all because I love them all. I'm a sign language interpreter and I teach piano and I play organ and piano at my church.
That's awesome. Well, so you talked about that your mother was deaf and that your father was hard of hearing. So there's a term that is used to describe that. I believe it's CODA, correct?
Yes.
Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. So a CODA is a child of deaf adult. That's what the acronym means. So my mom, was deaf and my dad was hard of hearing. And I would always tell people and joke around that the best part is I could play my music loud and they wouldn't know, and I could sing out loud and they, didn't even realize. But I think the best part is just getting to be born in the deaf cultural world and growing up with that, because not many people can say they've experienced that.
Yeah. I was fortunate enough my church, they had a thriving deaf community, and I was a part of facilitating activities for them. The sign name that they gave me was because I'm a singer, and and my name is Pamela, so that's the letter P, right? With melody, right? Yep.
Yep.
So deaf community is amazing, and but like you said, it's nothing like anybody has really experienced, and I have only the tip of the iceberg. So could you tell us a little bit about the deaf community?
Sure. So they pride themselves. They are proud to be part of the deaf community, the deaf culture. But there's two types of deaf people. We call capital D deaf and lowercase d deaf. So capital D deaf means they are fully immersed in deaf culture. They're proud of being deaf. They don't believe they need to be fixed. They might wear hearing aids as a tool, but they like being deaf. They don't want, some people say, oh, don't you wish you could hear? And they say no. They grew up like that. They enjoy their quiet world. And then there's lowercase d deaf, that they're deaf, but they're maybe oral or, speak and don't utilize sign language. And with being capital D deaf, I got to be around just amazing deaf role models in my parents' life, and they would be over for hours at our house, and I feel like with deaf people, they're in a limited world a lot that they don't have access. So they cling to when they are talking to someone that can sign, and they just don't want to stop, and they're just happy to be together. So I got to be around that and enjoy that. There's different parts of it being a CODA. Like, I feel like I was always mature because I had to be their interpreter when I was a kid. My parents didn't realize, and I didn't realize till I went to college, that there's ADA laws that you have the right to get an interpreter. And when I was younger, my parents didn't know that. So I would be at the restaurant and signing for them and ordering for them. I remember one time we had our house broken into by our neighbor, and I went with them to the police station and interpreted I was 9 years old, like,
Wow.
and where I went to the doctor's office with my mom, that was a constant thing. I always went with her and signed for her because I didn't know better and they didn't know better, that they had the right to it. So when I went to college and learned that, I said, oh no, things, now I demanded. And if they gave her a hard time, I would call and say, nope, it's the law. Like, it's their right to have an interpreter so they can have their health care. I mean, what's more important than your health? Like, to know and understand everything that's being said is important.
Yeah, absolutely. I've felt this conviction lately of, I talk about inclusion, and inclusion is really accepting, acknowledging, and affirming differences, all differences. And how, even with things like this, I'm working on how do I really offer access to people who may not be there at the moment. Like, I may not have deaf people in my audience, but how do I say, I affirm you, I celebrate you, and I know that you may want to be here. And if you are here, there's access for you. So I think that there's a growing awareness. I even noticed some of your posts, you were talking about sometimes for the briefings, the COVID briefings, there were no interpreters there. And so you have a whole community of people who just don't know what's happening if they don't have someone that can sign for them.
Exactly. And that would break my heart. I mean, I think the news did a pretty decent job. The local news would have the interpreter in the corner, but sometimes the president would be speaking. And I thought, oh my gosh, the news can do this. And the president, we can't have someone speaking for the president. And people will say, oh, well, there's captions. And I think, for one, I think if someone could actually just turn on the captions and try to read them, sometimes they go really fast. Sometimes they're not correct. But I think what a lot of people miss is that ASL is a true language and English is a language. So for deaf people, ASL is their first language and English is in their second language. So, and I say that, would you want to go to the doctor and write back and forth in your second language about your healthcare? Like, you'd want to know it in your first language and how you're fluent in. So just to have that access of that little box in the corner with the interpreter, I love when I see that. And there's actually some Facebook pages, which is awesome. Like DPAN is one of them. And like for the Super Bowl every year, they have the halftime show interpreted on their website, on their Facebook page. Oh, so wow. That's awesome. So, that just something as simple as that, they can enjoy it fully because they're knowing what's being said, and they have amazing interpreters that they choose. And a lot of time they have deaf interpreters, and that's a deaf person, that's an interpreter, and they have a hearing interpreter signed to them, and then the deaf interpreter interprets it. So it's awesome to see deaf talent. There was a amazing deaf talent at the Super Bowl, and I loved it. And he went viral, and it's amazing to see.
It was. You're talking about the gentleman who did the national anthem.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, I had chills. It was so powerful, and it was like he was being able to be recognized for who he was. And so I'm so happy that it went viral, and maybe that will help continue to raise awareness that deaf people are here, and it's important for them to be a part of our society. Everybody to be a part of our society. We can't leave anyone behind,
Exactly.
So that's beautiful.
Yeah.
You talked about music a little bit. And so I also know that you have a beautiful daughter who's an amazing dancer. And she also has auditory processing disorder.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about this? And is it related to deafness, or could you explain that a little bit?
Sure. So auditory processing disorder, how I kind of explain it, to her, so she kind of understands what she has. She can hear. She goes to the audiologist and takes a hearing test and passes it. So she can hear, but somewhere between hearing the message and her brain processing it, there's a disconnect. A lot of times it's when there's a lot of background noise and her brain can't decide, oh, this one is the important message that you need to be focused on. Her brain can't do that. So she's trying to listen to, the conversation in the corner and the music overhead on the loudspeaker, in the store, especially. Can you imagine all that background noise that we just kind of we filter out and don't even pay attention to? But for her brain can't. But interesting enough, it's not related to my parents because I would have been deaf probably. My mom became deaf at age 2. My dad, his mom was pregnant with him and had German measles. So that's why he became hard of hearing. So I think that's why I'm not deaf, that I can hear because it wasn't genetic.
Okay.
So for Liv, actually, my husband didn't know it, but found out later in life that he had auditory processing disorder. So we
Wow.
think it's a genetic factor with my husband. And yeah, it was interesting to see because as a baby, she would talk, but she wouldn't be as far as my friends with babies that were a few months older than her. And I thought, oh, you know, in a couple more months, she's going to say that or she's going to do that. And then she'd get there and she wouldn't. And then they would be saying these full sentences and she would say a little bit and then she'd babble in the middle and then have an ending. So I finally thought, you know what? And it's my first baby, so I don't really know what she was supposed to be doing. But then I started Googling, which is the worst thing you can do. And then I got a early intervention to come out and start working with her. So, and then you can't get diagnosed about APD until you're 7. But I heard of APD when she was about 3 or 4. And I just knew it. I always said, that's what she has. Like, that makes sense. That is everything she is or is doing. And then finally, I couldn't wait. That week she turned 7, she was at the audiologist and she got tested and she was diagnosed.
Oh, wow. Well, great job for being, on it, Mom, right? Like, so I guess this comes to helping folks who are not a part of the deaf community, but desire to be allies to all people, right? How can we, one, help normalize and actually advocate for the needs, access for the deaf community? And also, how can, because there's that language barrier, there are things I'm sure we could do. Do you have any suggestions?
Sure. Well, I think what I would like to see, if any public event is happening, they should just have an interpreter. Even if they don't know a deaf person is coming, they might have one coming, or it might make more come, knowing that there's access. Especially anything important should have, a meeting and a meeting with a lawyer, social security office, anything healthcare. I think they definitely need their own interpreter as well. I think right now it's also an extra hard challenge for deaf people right now with the pandemic and the masks, and they're covering their mouth and they can't read their lips anymore, and the sound's muffled if they are hard of hearing, and they do have some hearing. So they do have masks out there with like the clear window, but not many people use them. I know for my mom, I just think as long as you try, like some people get afraid to talk to them because I don't know how to. But I mean, paper and pen, the old fashioned way of writing back and forth, it's not their first language, but it's still, you're trying. I love when I see schools offer it as a language. That like makes me so happy to see that, so that more and more kids are growing up, and then they don't have to be an interpreter. They could be a nurse and then just have that in their back pocket to be able to communicate with their patients a little bit, not to, replace an interpreter, but just to have that extra access. And I can't imagine as a deaf patient to have my nurse sign with me or attempt to would make me feel so welcome. And so like, that they're trying to talk to me and communicate with me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what you're sharing with us is that the hearing community can really go out of their way just a bit to be welcoming, to be affirming. And so I would love for you, if you could, to teach us a sign that if we happen to be in contact with someone who is deaf or hard of hearing, just something that would let them know that we care, or we want to just be welcoming to them.
Right. I mean, I always think it's a good to know how to say, I mean, hello is kind of a general, everybody can wave or say hi. There's always my name. And then if you happen to know how to finger spell your name, this is the classic sign everybody is starting to know. And there's emoji now, which I love, but I love you. That kind of opens up a window too. This is how are you? So if you, So how are you?
Good.
And they might say, fine. I'm tired. Just kind of a few basic signs that, at least they feel like, oh, wow, wow, they know that. I know my best friend's mom worked like in retail. And whenever she had a deaf client come through, she would sign like, I'm your friend. And I thought that
Oh,
was so sweet, just like little things like that.
could you
I think,
show us that again? I'm
sure.
your friend.
So you point to yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and then this is the sign for your,
Mm-hmm.
and then this is friend.
That's beautiful. That is beautiful. Well, I think thank you is what I would like to say to you today for just taking some time out of your day to share with us. I also wanted to know, is there anything else that you would like to share that you think is something that we could really learn from when it comes to creating inclusivity with the hearing community and the deaf community?
Well, I touched on the capital D and the lowercase d, but something I think that is happening and people don't realize, we use like, politically correct terms, and a lot of people say hearing impaired. And I know that really upsets a lot of deaf, capital D deaf, because they think I'm not impaired, nothing's wrong with me, I'm not broken.
Mm-hmm.
So using deaf and calling what they are, they're deaf or they're hard of hearing. They would prefer those terms, because deaf people can do anything, they just can't hear. That's the only limitation, but they can be doctors and lawyers, and there's amazing deaf people in all careers. So just to stay away from that term. I always cringe when I hear it, but I don't think people are aware. I think they think that is more polite than just saying deaf. So
Absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing that. I don't think I knew that either. So I will definitely make sure that I correct myself when using it. So to use the correct term would be deaf or hard of hearing.
yes.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Laura, for just sharing with us today, giving us some wisdom and some insight. And I hope that you have an amazing day.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.